Hello and welcome to Lesbians Beyond the Binary, a very special panel for Lesbian Visibility Week. My name is Carrie Lyell and my pronouns are she and they. I'm an award-winning writer, media commentator and editor-in-chief at DIVA magazine. I'm passionate about amplifying the voices of LGBTQI women and non-binary people, and I've written about queer issues for DIVA, as well as The Guardian, The Independent, The Metro and others. In 2021, earlier this year, I was named as one of Attitude Magazine's 101 LGBTQ trailblazers, which was quite lovely. And I'm delighted to be joined today by two very lovely people. Sophia B, pronouns are they and them. Sophia is a singer-songwriter from London with Venezuelan and Lebanese heritage who decided to pursue music as a career after being diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2012. As well as recording music of their own, Sophia started their own record label, Montiel Records, named after their maternal grandfather, and recently signed indie punk emo duo Mother Can You Hear Me, who released their latest single, Chemical, with DIVA. Sophia identifies as queer, non-binary, and lesbian. And also Emma Flint, whose pronouns are she, they, and he. Emma is a 30-year-old gender-fluid ambrosexual based in the Midlands. Working as a writer and journalist, she specialises in LGBTQIA+ mental health and sexual well-being. Her hope is to raise more awareness and visibility for those usually overlooked. When she's not writing, she spends her time baking and singing her heart out to musical soundtracks. Same. So thanks so much for joining me today. First of all, Sophia, why did you want to be part of this panel? What was it about the kind of title or brief that spoke to you?
I think it's sort of that whole what would I do for my younger self type situation. I know growing up I would have loved to have seen this kind of stuff about. I know the internet has sort of expanded. So yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to get involved, in hopes that it might resonate or help someone else.
What about you, Emma?
Yeah, there is an element of that. I mean, being a 90s kid, there wasn't really anything accessible like this for me. So there is that thing of hopefully resonating with a lot of people my age, but younger and even older as well. And just because I like waving my queer flag around a lot whenever I get the opportunity, really. So yeah.
Yeah. In your bio, Emma, it says you identify as ambrosexual. For those who might not have heard of that term before, can you tell us a little bit about that and about your own journey with your sexuality and your gender identity?
It's actually a term that I kind of discovered fairly recently. And when I heard about it, I was like, okay, this really fits with how I feel and how I identify. So it's kind of, or my way of interpreting it, how I see it is that it's when your sexuality fluctuates. So sometimes you might feel lesbian and really identify as that, and then other times bisexual, pansexual, and there's kind of that fluidity with it. And I do find that since coming out when I was younger, I've always been like, okay, I feel very much like that one day or one week, and I'm like, yeah, and then it's like, oh, actually, no, I feel more like this. And I never had a way to express myself in a word to go with it. So yeah, it's kind of a new one for me, but I feel it's important because to take like ownership of that and use it as my identity, because I've just not had something that feels well suited to me before. And then I think there's times where I feel that I'm almost using an identity that I shouldn't, which I know is the wrong way of approaching it, but I think there's a lot of that discourse around in the queer community as well, that sometimes you're using a term that you shouldn't be.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that. It's very interesting. I think we still have these quite fixed ideas of like it's a very linear journey. You come out as something and then maybe you come out as something else. And so you're like, well, I wasn't that thing, you know, I wasn't straight, or I wasn't bi, I wasn't whatever. And this is now my true self. But like you say, it can be a very fluid journey for a lot of people. Sophia, is that something that you can relate to at all?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think my journey with pronouns has been a bit complicated because I've always felt like empowered by she, her, but accepting he, him for myself felt very personal, and like I didn't want to share that with everyone. I'm not sure how both of you feel, but sometimes I feel when you know, a stranger might ask a question, I feel like there's an entitlement to my experience. So I don't like labels as much. So I guess, you know, through introspection and understanding what non-binary really means, it doesn't mean you have to throw away being a lesbian, or you can, like, it doesn't matter. Every journey is completely unique. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I don't know. It's a tough one for everyone, I think, because as you mentioned before, like, I think it is a fluid thing and things change and whatnot. And the other thing as well is that growing up, identifying as a lesbian was not something that went down well for me, and I was very much bullied for it. So the association of the word lesbian was tough for me sometimes. So I quite enjoy queer as like a safe one that doesn't offend people too much. But I mean, everyone's different, so yeah.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I think I use different terms to describe myself depending on who I'm talking to often. So, you know, if it's someone in the street who I have made a judgment about and think they're probably cis and they're probably straight, then I might just say that I'm gay. You know, if it feels like a little bit safer, maybe I'll say I'm lesbian, depending on how I'm feeling that day. Queer maybe sort of expresses myself better, but then I'm not sure how a lot of people are going to feel about that. So really it is that you're having to make all of these adjustments and judgments all the time, aren't you, about is it safe to sort of express myself here, and how's that going to go down. It was interesting what you said there about non-binary and lesbian. To a lot of people they might seem like mutually exclusive identities. You know, how can you be this and this? Emma, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's just I don't understand why some people have a difficulty in seeing them as, you know, being able to marry together and work together. But I don't know whether that's because I identify as non-binary, so to me it's just like, oh, this rigid idea of what lesbianism is, that doesn't have to be cisgender, because like you said, there's a lot of people that still have this very traditional outlook on all terminology. But as we learn more as a community and we interact with each other, we start to realize that these definitions aren't set in stone. So I think it's because I don't see myself as part of the binary, because I'm not, that then I kind of can't grasp why anybody would see non-binary lesbianism as a problem. I don't know whether that's actually answering your question, but it's just, I can't get my head around it, why it's such a difficult thing for people to get to grips with.
Yeah, Sophia, you're nodding there.
Oh yeah, I think it's a weird one. I don't quite understand why it's so difficult for people to understand, especially when you consider, like, you know, women's rights in general. And if you're assigned female at birth, you're never going to experience male privilege from day dot. And I think we just don't have a level playing field. I think non-binary identities is a great way for everyone to learn and be included, but there's some kind of resistance there. So yeah.
There's obviously lots of conversations around this idea of the kind of extinction of the lesbian species based on you know, trans and non-binary identities, that all butches are being stolen and, you know, we're all being erased and all of those things. But I, you know, my view on that is that I think that fluidity and that sort of breaking down those rigid barriers, like we're saying, is actually a really great thing, because it there's just such a freedom there that we all exist along this continuum and we move across it and through it, you know, in different times in our life. And that's, to me, a really wonderful thing. It's not something to be threatened by. If the idea of lesbian is changing, then surely that means it's more, you know, everyone can have a chance to sort of experience that a bit. You know, we've all got a bit of that in us and we can all explore that. And I think as people, we're probably richer for that exploration, but as a community, we're richer as well. I wanted to talk about coming out a little bit. So I came out as bi originally, and then I came out as a lesbian later. And that was a fairly easy conversation to have with my parents because they were identities that they were familiar with. But I have never had a conversation with them around my gender identity. What about you guys? Are you open to friends, to family, to partners? Emma, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I am pretty open with that kind of thing. When I first came out, I not skipped the bisexual bit, but I was just like, no, I'm a lesbian, 100% lesbian. And my parents were like, yeah, that's cool. But my gender identity was a more difficult thing for me to figure out and get to grips with. Though I do think that you never just come out once or even twice. You're constantly coming out to whoever you meet that doesn't know you, because there's that assumption there that you're cis and you're het. Unless you've got this kind of the accepted face of queer that a lot of people outside the community expect. But yeah, I'm quite open with friends and family, but I do think sometimes that's also with my borderline personality disorder, I'm quite an oversharer. I kind of openly talk about things that some people might not feel as comfortable talking about. And kind of then sometimes panic about that afterwards. When I came out as gender fluid, though, I did have some friends that didn't handle it very well and just thought I was doing it because it was a trend, or what does that mean, or which was quite difficult. But then looking back on it, I kind of expected them to be that way because they've got a very narrow-minded view of what the queer community is. But overall, you know, my partner, my family, and my really close friends have been really positive about it and very welcoming of it. They just want me to be happy and comfortable. But I understand that not everybody has that experience, and it can be quite difficult to be out and proud. You know, there's this idea that we should be able to do that, and we should, but we're not always in an environment where we can.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Sophia? What's your experience of coming out being like?
It's a tricky one for me. I didn't have the best experience of it, to be fair. So I went to an all-girls school and I was still figuring out who I was. I still had long hair, the whole thing, and we didn't have a uniform, but we weren't allowed to wear trousers, so we had to be very, very feminine. And there was a girl in my class who liked me and whatnot, and then it all escalated and she turned it around on me, outed me to the whole school, and yeah, sort of said that they were unwarranted advances, which wasn't true. But that's actually what got me into songwriting. I wrote a song about it, and you know, within a week the whole school had heard it without my knowledge. But it, you know, I was trying to hide it from my parents and it was so stressful. And eventually I went to university in the States because I felt that I'd have that like freedom to express myself and not be around people who knew what I was like before. And that was really tough, because when I would come back home, I felt alienated and I didn't fit the mold of the, you know, my high school of feminine girls. I'm the only queer person in a class of like, I think it's 50 or something, which is just mind blowing. And then, you know, I think with my parents, like, of course it was going to be difficult every step of the way. A bit like you, I came out as bi and then I came out as a lesbian, and then obviously I cut my hair off, so that started, you know, bringing up questions. And I just kind of dealt with them one day at a time. You know, I'm figuring it out too. So I think it's interesting when people ask questions expecting you to be able to give them these like academic answers, and I'm like, Google is free. You could read. But you know, I'm happy to try and open up and have these conversations with people in hopes that maybe they'll be a bit more respectful around these things. But yeah, I think coming out is, sometimes I feel like it shouldn't have to happen as much, but I get why people feel they need to affirm themselves in that way. Mm-hmm. So
Emmy, you mentioned there coming out to friends and this idea that it's a trend, or you know, there's certainly this feeling around non-binary identity. It's like it's something that has just just been created. It was invented 5 years ago on Tumblr probably, and now, you know, everyone's non-binary. Obviously that's absolute nonsense. But do you remember the first time that you heard the words non-binary or gender fluid or gender queer, and what that meant to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's going back a few years now, because originally when I was like, I always say a baby gay, but when I literally knew nothing. When I got my partner, she was like, oh, there's so much for you to learn, realize and get involved with. And then slowly I started to do that, because I think there was still that kind of almost compulsory heterosexuality lurking in the background when I first came out, because I was quite young. I was 18 and most of my friends weren't queer. So it's probably going back 6-7 more years ago when I started to kind of really find a lot of like queer influences and other people within the community. And when I read about like non-binary and gender fluidity, it resonated, but I kind of told myself that it couldn't, because obviously I've always identified as a woman. How could I not be a woman? That's kind of what I've grown up with, what I've known. And like Sophia said earlier, there is an empowerment there when you're aligned with womanhood, that you kind of, I don't know, it's right saying you don't want to lose it, but I think some people then, if you say non-binary, it's like you completely are stripped of that, because no, you're a very fixed thing. So it resonated with me and I felt a connection to it, but I didn't feel comfortable exploring it further. It was only when we went into lockdown, actually, and I just turned 30 and I was away from all the judgment of a lot of outside sources, that I kind of sat with this and was like, okay, yeah, why do I keep denying this myself? But it took a very long time, and initially I felt like an imposter, which I think a lot of people have, because media, well, mainstream media has a very particular idea of what non-binary is. Mm-hmm. And because I'm quite femme presenting a lot of the time, they automatically think I can't be it. So yeah, again, I don't know if I've answered your question and more just rambled, but there we are.
Definitely not rambling at all there. That was really a really interesting way of putting it, I suppose. Sophia, do you what do you feel like finding that language for you meant? You know, I think there's a lot of people in history who we could possibly read as lesbian who actually would have been gender non-conforming, non-binary, trans, you know, for example, but they didn't have that access to the language. For you, finding those words to describe yourself, was that quite a liberating experience?
It was liberating, but it was also like, oh, that's what I've been feeling my whole life. Why wasn't this explained to me? Why isn't this part of education? And, you know, realizing the effects of Section 28 and all of these things, it just kind of opened a can of worms. And I just was like, I need to read as much as I can to understand how gender has basically kind of been created in a lot of ways. So yeah, I guess it just made me want to learn more, so that I could feel like I'm not the first person to feel like this, and that there are people who have been fighting for things to change. And actually we've created wonderful language to explain to others what it is that we feel or identify with. You know, intersectionality is really important as well. Like, I feel like that needs to come up a lot more, you know. Like if you're non-binary and disabled, it can be so awkward. You know, I'm disabled, and getting misgendered like in the hospital when I'm feeling a certain energy or not is really uncomfortable. So yeah, them I think is great, you know, if you're not sure. So yeah, I'm grateful for it is mainly what I feel like.
Yeah, it's really you know, to hear about those experiences, particularly, you know, in settings like healthcare, it can be, you know, there's just absolutely no visibility, is there? There's no sort of understanding of awareness of anything that isn't a sort of binary gender. But there are times in our lives and places, I think, that we can feel seen as non-binary people. What are some of the things, Emma, that make you feel seen and make you feel sort of like warm your heart a little bit?
I think for me, I live in Staffordshire, which is like very not gay. There's not much open queerness about. So it's a lot of online communities for me. I mean, obviously I've got my close friends, my best friend, which I know sounds like a very school termy thing, but she's wonderful. She's just like, own it, whatever you're feeling today, you come as you be you. Which is lovely, and I've not had before. My partner's very much the same. But it is online communities and getting more stuck into just like particularly like drag kings and drag performances. I've really started to get involved with and being able to kind of play around with my gender in that way. So that's kind of what I found like warms my heart. And then just finding like little silly like videos online of just lovely queer bubbles that it's lovely and it's heartwarming in that way, because we haven't really got it being in a rural location. I know we're not like in the sticks somewhere, but it is very cishet, white, and quite conservative around here. So it is a lot of online stuff for me that gives me that happy feeling and feeling connected to the non-binary community.
Sophia, what are the things that empower you and make you feel seen?
There's a few things. I think it's having one-on-one conversations with friends who have, you know, similar questions around their identity or wanting to learn more. I think that has meant more to me than anything. I think the online community has been a great way for me to learn things that I might never have known. And I think also performing for me, just there's something that like transcends gender for me on the stage. And I think that, you know, as much as I have anxiety around performing, once you're there, you're like, this is awesome. So yeah, hopefully soon I'll be able to get back to that.
Yeah. That's a nice kind of seg into wanted to talk about hopes for the future. What do you think are some of the challenges facing those of us who are non-binary or gender non-conforming, genderqueer, and how do you think we can overcome them? How do you hope we might overcome them? Sophia, do you want to go first?
I think we got to talk about it more. I think in the UK as well, for some reason, I just feel like it's a bit messy, and having the right kinds of support systems are really important. I know mermaids are amazing and there are all sorts of organizations, but somehow I feel like the US, I don't know, more present in that front, having spent some time living there and, you know, watching from afar. I mean, we all have our different battles, but if we could align somehow with the US and the UK, I think that would be wonderful. But yeah, just continuing to talk about it and continuing to have representation, allyship, and just celebration of people's stories. So yeah.
Absolutely. Emma, what about you? Are you feeling hopeful? What are you feeling about the future?
Yeah, I am. I don't know, because I'm quite a pessimist, but I do feel quite hopeful, because whenever I'm in doubt and you look at like mainstream society and the stuff in the news, and the UK is kind of like a dumpster fire at the moment for quite distressing news. But then you go back to the community and you speak and interact with people in it, and you do see that there is hope, and that for all the challenges that we're faced with, we're pushing back, we're striving to do better and do more. But I do think that mainstream media, mainstream organizations, anything like that, they need to be given diverse representation. I know that's starting to kind of trickle through, but there is still that very much relying on a stereotype and things that are seen as safe or accepted by people who aren't part of the community, particularly in like film and television and games as well. And I think that really needs to change, because for people that are outside the community and don't really interact with it in any way, they just see that as the norm, and then anything else is deviating from it and is wrong. So I think the mainstream has a lot of catching up to do, because I think how they see like being genderqueer and non-binary and gender fluid is very much how gay and lesbianism was seen so many decades ago. we're kind of behind on that footing. But I don't think that'll come without us keep pushing, which we are doing, but I get that it's hard, particularly in the UK. I think the Western world in general is quite hit and miss with representation, and then news elevates a lot of hateful elements a lot of the time that comes from people that don't understand the community to begin with. So it's a challenge, but I am hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, I think those challenges that you both mentioned there, I think that comes because of progress in a way. You know, with visibility comes you know, increased oppression and things, doesn't it? So I think there's that irony and that cruelty that it could push us further back into the closet. But as you say, we need to just keep pushing and keep having those conversations, and you know, pushing for that representation as well, which is so important, and which will help people to understand that there is such diversity and there's such difference in the community, and that's not something to be afraid of. You know, perhaps that's the way through. Sophia, on the representation question, you know, how easy or difficult is it to be a non-binary musician at the moment? Is there an understanding in the industry of that at all?
There have been so many times where I thought I was understood, and I realized that it was an entitlement to my experience rather than wanting me to succeed and stuff like that. That's a big reason why I left New York, because I just felt like I didn't have the right kind of support. Like I was really trying to put myself out there, and I just didn't have the right support system. Maybe I didn't find it, and coming back to London, that helped a little bit, because at least the accent sounded familiar to me and whatnot. But I don't know, I tick a lot of weird umbrellas, so I find it really hard with representation. That's why I'm kind of here. I'm half Venezuelan, half Lebanese. I was raised in the UK. I've got Crohn's. I'm a musician. There are so many parts of like my identity that I never know which one is going to get used against me, if that makes sense. So I wish I could give you an answer, like, is it because you're non-binary that being a musician has been difficult? Is it because you're a woman? Is it because you're Latin? Is it because you're Arab? Is it because you're British? I will never know, and frankly I don't care to know. So yeah, I hope that answers it a little bit.
No, definitely. I think all you can do is just keep doing you, and you know, try not to get sort of bogged down in that, you know. And Emma, you too have spoken about some of those intersections in and different identities. You're having you know, mental health problems, you know, sexuality, gender identity. Are there sort of like good examples of representation that you see that you're like, that's me, or that's kind of helped me to express this bit of myself?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I normally can think of people or posts I've seen, and now my brain's gone incredibly blank. But yeah, there are, I think, because I know people criticize social media for being an echo chamber, and I think we are guilty of creating that kind of environment, but that's the environment I want. I mean, I don't want to be met with bigotry and hatred when I go on my social media, but I'm quite lucky that I interact with a lot of queer writers, whether that's in journalism, fiction, or any kind of creativity, that they post things that just resonate with me. Either it's discussing the fluidity of gender, coming out at a later age. So there are things that help me be seen. But I do know what Sophia means with, there's almost like that entitlement that people think they should have your story, and it's quite performative caring when they don't. But I've found that I get that with my mental illness as well. So again, you don't know what it actually is that people might be kind of reacting to you a certain way. And it's just kind of like, let's spin the wheel and see where it lands. I feel very awkward with this kind of thing. So representation's hard. And I think particularly in any kind of creative community, because there's so many voices and so many people, and it only takes seeing like the wrong post or the wrong thing, and you can feel very alienated and attacked. I don't think I've answered your question at all, and I've kind of gone off on a completely different tangent. But yeah, there are things that make me feel seen, and educators that I follow online. I know I only remember the first name being Zoe, but they do a lot of like myth busting of like LGBTQ things, and that's really helpful. But yeah, it again, it's mainly online things for me, and just seeing the right posts, interacting with the right people, and also writing stuff myself and trying to kind of add my voice in there and my experiences.
Yeah, brilliant. We're just about out of time. I just wanted to ask one final question. If you could give your younger selves a piece of advice around coming out, or around sort of living your authentic life, being bringing all parts of yourself to the table, what would you say? Emma, do you want to go first?
God, I just had a mad urge to swear, because that's what I'd say to my younger self, just like, you know, it's not everyone kind of thing. But it is that, because when I was younger, I was so bogged down in people that I thought mattered in my life and that was having more of an impact and would be around longer than what they were, and it held me back so much, and I was so bothered about what everybody else thought. And I get that school's kind of a breeding ground for that, and education in general, but I'd just like to tell my younger self to, like, it's not a big deal, these people don't matter, and you're going to miss out on years where you're not being yourself. And I think there's times where I feel a bit resentful of that at myself, but at society, that's kind of the environment that I grew up in. So yeah, it's to care less about what they think, because at the end of the day, it's important about my own happiness, and that it's got the potential to stall me, and I lose out on experiences that I could have had sooner.
What about you, Sophia?
I think I'd say stop being angry at yourself. It's okay. Like, stop the negative talk. You're allowed to love yourself where you are. And if people don't accept you, protect your energy. Continue to direct the love towards yourself rather than losing energy being unnecessarily angry. But also, your anger is valid. So, and journal, just write your feelings down, please. Take it out on paper. That would be my advice.
Great. And I know that I said that was the last question, but this will be the last question. And maybe it'll be similar to your advice for your younger self, but if there's somebody watching who thinks they might not be cis, who thinks they might not be straight, who is wondering where they fit into the world, what would you say to them?
Me? I would say, no matter what the decision is, you're enough where you are. Like, you're not any less than because you identify with that. That's your personal right. That's your divine right to get to discover yourself. So have a laugh, have fun with it. Like, and remember that it's yours. That's you. That's your fingerprint. So love on it.
I love that. Emma, what about you?
Yeah, not to be worried about if you suit the label or term perfectly. That I don't want to make it sound callous, like try on, but you can, because it might be that you think that you're genderqueer, and then you learn more and you interact more and you realize that you're not, and then another label or term sits better with you. But it's okay to do that. You don't have to just know straight away. And like Sophia touched on, it doesn't have to be this rigid thing. Just don't be hard on yourself if you don't fit the expectation that everybody else has. It's about doing you and doing what's best for you. But definitely, like, go online and kind of read and explore it and interact with the community. Because although there's some scary elements in the community that we won't draw upon too much, most people are so welcoming and they want to help you. So yeah, don't be worried about not fitting that perfect box that everybody seems to think we need to all fit in some way.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you. Yeah, let's get rid of the boxes, or put ourselves in all the boxes, you know. Doesn't matter, you know. This has been a really lovely conversation. Thank you both so much for your time and your insights, and for sharing your personal stories with us. I really, really appreciate it. I hope this has been helpful. I hope people watching have learned something. I know that I've learned a lot here. So if people want to follow you guys online, where can they find out more about you, Emma?
Literate elf. with a double E, so there's the literate and then the elf. Yeah, that's for my Instagram and Twitter. It's just me being ranty and very queer though, so hopefully it works for them.
And Sophia, where can we find out more about you, hear your music, and find out what you're up to next?
You can follow me on Instagram or Twitter, and it's Sophia Boustany, so SOFIA BOUSTANY. And yeah, on Twitter, I'm usually just tweeting at Mother, can you hear me, about how much I miss them. So yeah. But yeah,
great. Well, I look forward to continuing the conversation over on Twitter. And once again, thank you both so much for this. It's been really lovely.
No, thank you. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Yeah.